Dubalang Sambanani, hello South Africa. A very warm welcome to your number one youth current affairs show, of course, Kiwaga Expressions. This is definitely the place for you to air your views. We want to say Happy Heritage Month to you as a young person across the country, and I think just to South Africans as a whole. And we know Heritage Month is a very important part of how we celebrate who we are as Africans. And as you know, as we celebrate Heritage Month, cultural diversity, traditions, as well as customs in this country, these all play a very pivotal part of how we identify ourselves as Africans, right? And traditional healers, Sangoma, have been a very fundamental part of that identity, and of course, spirituality and culture. Now, more than ever, we've been seeing a trend that has been taking place in South Africa where young people are taking up lento yokuba Sangoma, and they call themselves millennial Sangomas.
So, sinibingelela sinamngele ngumxolisi wakwaMasango, and that's correct wena Jacqueline. That's why we felt it was very important ukuthi namhlanje siwuhlelo to reflect on this very important conversation, ikakhulukazi when it comes to young people as well. Njoba wazi ukuthi Expressions is at the top of all conversations that involve you njengomuntu omusha. What do you have to say about inkulumo esinazo namhlanje ohlelweni? Do interact with us ey'nkundleni zethu zokuxhumana. And of course, that is the big question namhlanje. We are asking, is ubungoma a popular trend or true calling?
So the big question of the day is this a new trend, or are young people truly embracing African spirituality as well as tradition? Of course, I'm not going to have this conversation by myself. I'm joined by a panelist, and I have to say hello to you too. Ninjani. Havo, halala. And of course, we've got our audience who are also going to be part of this very important conversation as we celebrate and we commemorate Heritage Month here on Expressions. Welcome to Expressions.
Yeah, so protocol is Thokozani.
Protocol observed. A very, very warm welcome to Expressions. Gogo, since we are Togozing, I'm petty, guys, please forgive me. But I want to find out from you, whenever we're talking about Ubungoma, what is the difference? When we're talking about African spirituality, Ubungoma, what is there a difference between the two? Educators.
Well, Ubungoma is one aspect of African spirituality, is the healing element. But there's also governance, right? That's also how we govern within African systems. There's also how we run the economics in African systems. So African spirituality is a bigger spectrum of things. It's about the collective and functioning of systems for the well-being of the community in order for the black race to thrive. So when we're looking at African spirituality, we're looking at the bigger scheme of things. But when we're speaking about Ubungoma, then we're speaking about the medicine, the healing elements of African spirituality. But African spirituality is not about that, because there's also social constructs and how families are formulated through rituals, right? Through rites of passages and so forth.
And I like how you've unpacked it. And I think I will obviously address my panelists, because we've got academics, we've got pastors, we've got, social workers and so forth. But what is the guiding principle there? I mean, with Christianity, there's a Bible, there's the Quran and so forth. What is the guiding principle that informs African spirituality? So even when you do decide you want to enter into this particular space, what is it that guides it?
For me, becomes a problem where you are asking that question from, because you are asking it in comparison to the very same religions that have demonized African spirituality. And the problem with that is that then we need to compete and compare, and once we compete and compare, then it's not comparable. So for me, it's very important. Spirituality, the guiding principle of spirituality is understanding that we are spirit first before we are this body. It's understanding that there are entities and beings that walk with us even though we cannot see it with our physical eyes. So the guiding principle of African spirituality is that we are a physical manifestation of Creator. And as a physical manifestation of Creator, we have spiritual guides, we've got angels, and we've got ancestors that are helping us navigate the complexities of this life. We don't have ancestors dictating, we don't have ancestors enforcing or imposing. That comes from a religious programming. This whole thing of the ancestors are giving you this and are demanding that. We've learned that from religion because African spirituality has moved away from also spirituality, because when we got colonized, everything of ours was stripped away, demonized, because they understood that our power is spirituality. Because spirituality is your God self. So if we return to the true essence of our God self, then we won't be sitting here demanding and begging for employment. We will be employing people.
Gogo Dineo in the building. Let's just start there. But I think it's and this is the part that is interesting, right? And I think I want to bring you in, Pastor Zolani. I mean, you have forsaken this part of your life. You've even gone as far as burning traditional cloths and so forth. You've disowned this, you've put this behind you, and you have said, I'm a Christian and so forth. I want to understand, I mean, hearing what Gogo Dineo has just said, what your positioning around this issue of, traditional and African spirituality. What does that mean to you?
Well, thank you, Jackie. First of all, I must be blunt concerning the word of God about ubungoma. The word of God clearly states one thing in the book of Acts chapter 4 verse 12. There is no other name which a man can be saved by except the name of Jesus Christ. So to us believers, which is the children of God, it's Jesus Christ plus nothing. So when we're speaking about ubungoma, I heard Gogo saying somehow we are demonizing. It's not true actually, about demonizing something. What I can just honestly say is that if, let's say, a righteous dies, that righteous cannot be turned into an angel. And even a wicked person, if he dies, he can never be a demon. You understand? So to us, children of God, we don't mix Jesus Christ. It's him plus nothing. That's my stand.
No, it's fine.
No, I think for me, this is where religion, and I think for me, what is also disturbing is that we cannot be speaking, because I had the topic. The topic was, is ubungoma a popular trend or is it a genuine calling? Then you bring a pastor who has no context and deeper understanding of African spirituality.
But
No,
wait.
no, let me finish, Jackie.
So, but wait.
No,
Hold
let me finish, because Christianity demonized African spirituality. We were colonized through the very same Bible we're supposed to be taking in and saying we have found Jesus. Because I don't remember him saying, I will be missing, you should be seeking out for me. Right? Christ is about the level of consciousness. Christ is the one who says, when I say I am the way, the truth, and the life, what does he say later on? Who is God's name? How do we refer to God, the great I am? So it's the Spirit of God that is in us that is talking about, not a person. Because when I'm saying that it demonizes it says through Jesus, who is a dead man, who does not exist amongst us. So African spirituality, hold on, Jackie. Yes. Mm-hmm. African spirituality, because this is what I say to pastors, right? When they say only through Jesus and no, we don't speak to the dead. I'm like, your assumption is we are speaking to the dead. We are speaking to the spirit of our ancestors. Because in African spirituality, the body dies, but the spirit goes to live on. Hence, they say energy never dies, it transforms. That's what science is telling us. So African spirituality is there.
100%. And 100%, but I also want to qualify one thing. If we are talking about heritage and culture, which simply means a way of living, Christianity is also a chosen way of living. And if we are going to represent a diversity and a plurality of voices, we can't just have people who think the same. Hold on, wait.
We should be having a group of Sangoma in their different fields of practices because Ubungoma is diverse. Having a conversation amongst ourselves, interrogating the popularism or the popular of Ubungoma. So if we are bringing up, because what do I need to do now? I need to sit here and defend myself.
No.
We cannot say that Christianity is a way of life as a religion.
Okay, so
African
I've listened.
spirituality
So wait.
is embedded
Okay,
in
so
our heritage.
Gogo Dino, the same way that I've given you the respect while you were speaking, and I listened and I kept quiet, I think it's the same thing that I'm asking right now. So as expressions, we are saying that we want to be able to bring voices that are different. We've invited literally a clinical social worker to be able to say, help us decipher this. Because as young people, it's important that they're able to hear voices that are different. So we can't have our gogo dino by 5 fila, bastela into A1. We know, yes, we do. And let me tell you why. Because part of what we want to do as the educational aspect and the conversations, and I love your engagement and I love your passion, is that even as young people are sitting here, it's important for them to hear other voices. And nobody's attacking anybody here. No one, right? No one is being attacked. But it's important, right? We live in South Africa, there's a democracy, there's freedom, meaning our views, even if we differ, are still important. So that's where this is all coming from. Nobody is attacking Ubungoma, but we're trying to figure out, as expressions, Uti, is this a trend? Is it a trend? But that's why Gogo Dino's voice is also important, but the pastor's voice is also important as well. It's also important. Right? So I think moving on, Prof. And this is why we love having these types of conversation. So for me, conflict is not a problem. It's not a problem because conflict is also allows us to have a different way of thinking. If we're not being challenged in our dispositions, how do we grow? How do we become better? But in a modern South Africa, right, that we're having conversation about decolonization and so forth. How do we find a way in which, firstly, young people are not led astray when they go into these kinds of spaces, but also we find mutual respect for differences?
Right. Thank you very much. So I'm a professor of pharmaceutical science, so I cannot really address a lot of these issues. What I would say is that there's no either or. Sometimes there's a false dichotomy. And when I look around the room, for instance, you're wearing cultural things, but you're also wearing modern things. And if you look at a country like Japan, for instance, it's a country that has kept its culture, but is very modernized. Why can't we do that? And so it's the same kind of conversation that I think as individuals, it's like going to a banquet and you pick and choose what it is that works for you. And that's very important, right? Because you can be a Christian, but you're grounded in culture as well. In fact, as you know, the history of Christianity is Judaism. And when you look at Jews, it's not for them about a religion. It's about a way of life. And a lot of Jewish rituals are actually also mirrored in a lot of African cultural rituals that we have. So I was reflecting on this because I do a lot, I work with traditional healers, but it's really to modernize the medicine, the medicinal part of what they do. Now, if you think about it, Jesus got 3 gifts. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And it turns out that all of them are from Africa, because actually there's no gold in Israel. Myrrh, for instance, is probably the most valuable plant product in the world today, and it comes out of Sudan, and it's a very important medicine, right? So you will find that we then have, even in the Bible, the use of medicinal plants, aloe, the cedars, things like that. So I think, again, it's important for us, in general, I think, not to be led down paths like, this way or that way, but to really be holistic in how we approach life and take the good in whatever it is that is presented into us. Because I think at the end of the day, all spirituality, all religion is really about one thing: loving your neighbor. Yeah, if you think about it, all the spiritual texts, whether it's Buddhism, whether it's Islam, Christianity, our own traditions are really just about looking after this person that I call a neighbor. Thank you.
And I want to bring Zolani into this conversation because a lot of the time, because young people are looking for understanding, they're looking for knowledge, credible knowledge. When we were growing up, you'd have the aunt or the whatever down the road, but uyahlanya, and then we never knew whether is this mental illness or they'll say no, it's because she refuses to take up the call or whatever. That's the ancestors have done that to her. So please clarify for us, where does that line sort of get drawn, where it's actual mental health issues or it's a genuine calling? How do we make sense of that?
Yeah. Sure. Maybe I should just, I think, precede this with a concession, right? I think the conversation is happening in a space where, traditional healthcare has historically been demonized, and I think that's a concession we need to make. But also, I think, secondly, I want to prefix my response in saying I like what David was saying in talking about, false dichotomies, the idea that, one cannot exist without the other. So I've worked with a lot of patients, some presenting as Christian, but also appreciating, traditional healthcare. And we also know through research, for example, that, there was a study conducted in KZN which indicated that, amongst patients who presented with severe depression, almost 50% of them indicated that they would have seen a traditional healthcare practitioner before seeing a biomedical mental health care practitioner. So that's the second concession that I want to make to kind of indicate that the two don't necessarily have to exist as polar opposites, right? But I think also it's very important for me to acknowledge that, biomedicine on its own has its own demons of having, pathologized blackness to the point where black people have historically been denied access to mental health care because there was a presumption that being black just indicates pathology in any case. So there's that historical context that is also very problematic for biomedical health care. Nonetheless, there have been progressions that have been made, and I think one of those progressions for me, which has actually been quite soothing, is realizing that there's some synergies between traditional healthcare practitioners and biomedical healthcare practitioners. So I think in most cases, I usually would say if your therapist does not care about your spiritual well-being, they probably are not a good therapist. I think any therapist, especially if you're trained in South Africa, you should care about your patient's spiritual well-being. And now, whether or not that spirituality inculcates ubungoma or Christianity, unfortunately, I'm not qualified to make that determination. But to come to the question that you've asked, there are instances where a patient may present with what seems like, symptoms on the spectrum of psychotic disorders, right? And I'm saying it's a spectrum because it's so varied. So we usually look at psychosis and we think it's just hallucinations and delusions, but it's actually a lot more complex than that. And so there may be those presentations, and in some cases, those presentations may precede, a patient actually going through initiation for Rubungoma, and some come out of the end and say, actually, I really needed to go through that initiation. It helped me. In some cases, it's a false indication, and some people don't, consult the right people, or they don't get the right therapist who's able to guide them through the process. And so it almost becomes this negative consequence for the patient. So I think in most cases, we tend to conflate, and I'll speak from a closer perspective. We talk about, ukuthwasa, inkenke, umuntu xa kuthiwa unenkenke, right? And there's this presumption that you can't have both inkenke and depression, or you can't be depressed and be someone with a calling at the same time. And I think the two can coexist. And as long as we almost try to force a separatism, then we're creating a space where people can't get the holistic health care that they need. And for me, holistic health care looks at the spiritual, the psychological, the physiological, and all other aspects of a human being. Thanks.
So Gogo Dineo, for the young people out there who in here and obviously who are watching the show, how do we differentiate, right? Especially when we're talking about a true calling. How do you know it's a true calling? How do you know it's not mental health? But also, how do we know when it's just fake? There are some young people out there, unfortunately, who are just, this is a trend for them and it's become hip and happening. Like, I'm looking at you right now, you know what I mean? It doesn't look like what it looked like when we were growing up. So how do we differentiate between the two, especially if there are young people here who need help and they come to someone and this person happens to be fake?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there is also false leading information around the calling, where everybody who's having a midlife crisis, they're struggling with their studies, they're going through a tough time at home, they're looking for a spiritual bypass. So spiritual bypass is using spiritual processes to escape a harsh reality, thinking that by entering into that space, you'll gain your sanity back. But I think what Zolani has said is that the problem...
That was deep. I'm sorry, did you guys hear that? Please just repeat that.
Spiritual bypassing.
Yeah.
So spiritual bypassing is people who engage in spiritual processes trying to escape a reality, thinking they will gain their sanity. So this is when people would say, we would say that when a child has been raped, but he asambe so hlawula and sipahle about it. That's not going to do away the incident, the trauma that has occurred. So with mental psychoticness, because we were called amahlanya, we are crazy. How do I look at you and tell you things that you've never disclosed to me before? There is a level of insanity into it, right? But when you go through initiation is to actually go through regulation, which is what psychology speaks about, regulating the nervous system in order for one to be able to not act out of character. Stage. You see, I'm passionate, but you'll never see me vugela idlozi. Even in that moment, it wasn't idlozi elvugayo, because sometimes yes, that's how I am. And I think for me, Zolani captured it very well. I think also when we bring these conversations, let's frame them well. Guti, we're hearing different perspectives, because the minute you put something at a defense, it will defend itself. It's that's how nature operates. So that's one. It's important when people are told to have a calling, because I can't say to you, no, we look at a collective of symptoms. We don't look at one symptom, Guti, you are failing at school, or you have an eye problem, or you've got a headache, or your feet are swollen. It could have been early stages of diabetes, for example. So we look at the collective of symptoms, but beyond that, we look at what is the root cause, because it's a journey. That's why it's called the journey. You don't find out you have a calling and you go for initiation. There are processes one needs to go through to determine indeed that your calling, does it require you to become a Sangoma? All of us sitting in this room are called today. You play your calling very well as a facilitator of this conversation. So all of us are called, and if we we are not in alignment with why our soul has come at this time, we're gonna lose our sanity. So, but does that calling does it mean you have to become isangoma? No, that's why you go back emasikweni nasesintwini sasekhaya to determine ukuthi wena mhlawumbe udinga imbeleko or when there's a ritual okufanele uyenzele yasekhaya that you never, wena fanele uye entabeni. That's what you need to do before. So that's what it is. And we need to also understand, Jacqueline, to say that when we speak about trauma, this is what we call a spiritualist generational curses that have been passed on from one generation to the other. As a race, we've got huge collective trauma that has been passed on from one generation to the other. So when you are carrying wounds of the ancestors that died during apartheid, that died fighting for this liberation that we speak of today, when they come through you into your nervous system, you will be overwhelmed. What are these voices that I'm hearing? What are these messages that I'm hearing? So it is advisable to still see a therapist, because therapy is to soothe you, is to help you return back to a bit of calmness. Then we can see if indeed, Guti, is this a brain chemical imbalance or is this a spiritual calling indeed?
Sure. I think it's, and I love the fact that we can have such a robust, dynamic, passionate conversation about this, because it really does come down to who we are as Africans, or at least who we choose we want to be. But we continue after the break with this very important conversation. You're watching Expressions.
Let me be emphatic when it comes to the SABC's position around ancestral worship. And it's premised on scriptural basis that there's one mediator between man and God, and that's the man Christ Jesus. Young people more and more are taking this up because I've witnessed, and certainly that's the position of the party, that there seems to be influencers, a group of influencers that have profound influence on this generation. They accept the calling. Once they do, they put the call on the pedestal, it becomes attractive to young people. And so you're having this growing number of people that I would say become interested in the whole notion of being a Sangoma. But it's almost like a rebelling against those established convictions of Christianity that, as we understand them, to say we are not going to be conforming to what you think is right and wrong, and to cultural dictates or religious dictates, as it were. But secondly, on the notion of Pan-Africanism, more and more young people are saying, look, let's go back to the source, the original source. Who is an African? Who is a black man? You know, and when they trace those roots, it leads them to Sangoma practices as being one of those religious observations that black people typically believed in and consulted on prior to Christianity coming to the continent.
Right, you're still watching your #1 youth current affairs show. The name is Expressions. Thank you so much for joining us. And of course, I'm Namhlanje is again from a TUT, courtesy of the gracious consideration of TUT, our host for today. Now, Mundomusha umbuzo mkhulu ke namhlanje on the show. Siyabuza ukuthi ngabe abantu abane calling yobungoma, is this a trend or a true calling? That is the conversation we're essentially having. Namhlanje, what do you have to say about the conversations we're having? Do interact with us in guys, let's get the conversation started. Perhaps I know a lot came through from Jacqueline and my panelists at the top of the show. What is your addition to the conversation?
My name is Pusha Morera.
Okay,
During the
continue.
COVID-19 period, a lot of students were biotasa, they dropped out. They focused on into Yoktasa and Mabayotasa, they don't even focus on their studies. They don't work. After that, obviously, they won't even get the customers to work towards them. And another thing is that the Christians, I think it was last week when I was at church, they were like, when we pray, you don't have to use a candle. You just bow down and pray. as students at our residence, I have a roommate. When I have a roommate, she believes in Sangoma stuffs and I believe in Christianity. When she lights the candle, I be like, how this one we are tagata and stuff, while I believe in praying.
I think on my side, to address the issue of that, us as Christianity demonizes tradition or ubungoma, it's wrong. Because if you check the word of God, it says that why should the living consult the dead? And it says that it's not God, the God of the living. Yeah, so, and also to ask, why then, if someone has to be initiated or angena kubungomeni, they want 9,000. We are poor. We are a poor society. How are we going to get that money for us to get initiated or ube ungena kuba ubungomeni? If you find out the money that they charge for you to be initiated into these things, it's too much for our society.
From what I've gained from the panel is that Christianity is a man-made concept. So what you believe in works for you. So religiously, I believe that African people have a power within them. So it works for us as well. So we must just balance the two. If you believe in traditional healers, work on it, believe in it, but you don't have to pass judgment on everybody else. So thank you for the opportunity.
All right. And ngiyakhumbula kahle, I think some of those sentiments did also come from the esteemed panelists as well. Asiqhubekele phambili sinikeze usisi lapha to make her point.
Greetings to all. I actually have two questions directed to Ugogo Dineo and the pastor. For Gogo Dineo, it's you mentioned that with African spirituality doesn't mean that ancestors dictate our lives, but you find cases where it's like mele uhlabela abaphansi bakwatile and all those things. But how do we know they're actually angry? What signs do they throw? You're not getting any money, you're not getting employed because bakwatile abaphansi and everything. And with Upasta, the question is, how do you know that you have a calling to be a pastor? How do you know that you have a healing power to heal people? Thank you.
All right. Okay, thank you so much. And of course, Mbugelo, do interact with us in Kundlan Zethu Zokuxhumana as we continue to have this also important conversation. Yes, you can go ahead and make your point.
Greetings again. My name is Teboho. I have a question for Gokdineo. My number one concern with Ukutwasa is when young girls are being victimized. What regulations are put in place to make sure that our girls are safe and that we do not experience rape and killings of young girls? Thank you.
I think it's very important to start on the base and state the fact that it's very important for all of us to understand that Christianity or the Bible itself does not need people to defend it. And it's quite clear in terms of when you saw Ms. Dineo wanting to defend whatsoever points and Ugutwasa by how she reacted when questions were posed and how the entire conversation went. But I want to use, you're speaking about something that is very that is very concerning in terms of the trend that is here. Anything in this world, when it starts and it begins to be a trend, people who are conformist will begin to follow that thing. And because of it's being done by people that are in the relevant spaces, people that who are called celebrities, then we think that it's something that is normal, which is not normal. Therefore, I would just to ask to pose a question, and my question is going to Ms. Dineo. Uguti, how then do you balance in life when it comes to Indaba Yokuthwasa and ensuring that people are living according to how they want to live and according to their own preferences without having abantu to come and speak upon their lives? Thank you.
Now I'm simply gonna answer to the head topic. I believe that Ukuthwasa is not a trend. Bungaka. Actually, when we come across Amathwasani, we would run because they said it's scary. But the more we get to learn about our culture, is the more we get to see that it is not that scary. All we have to do is believe in our Africanicity and just go ahead with it. So I don't believe that it's a trend.
Okay. All right.
I would love to say that Ugutwasa is not a trend. First of all, I would like to say that we are a decolonized generation. We accept who we are, we accept our African roots, so we follow what our parents and our grandparents told us, and then the ways that they have shown us. We don't hide behind the Bible. Thank you.
All right. Okay.
My name is Mandisa Zwani. I'm an integrated communication student. And I stand before you as one of the spiritually inclined young ladies. I want to address this thing. Yes, we live in a time whereby everything is named as a trend. But when it comes to Ubungoma, I think it is not a trend because it comes with traumas. As Ugogo Dinero said, that you look like a crazy person. You go through a lot when you are spiritually inclined. You cannot fake that. You cannot fake going to a person and letting that person know of things that they don't even know, but they are yet to know. So it is not a trend.
One of the things that as Christians that we should appreciate, particularly when she spoke about the part of colonization, I want to understand that colonization really, I think maybe 1600 or 1800, came through the missionaries. But the Bible does not originate with the Western, it originates with God. Hence, whatever that, particularly as Christians, we believe is to say that the designer or the creator of the universe is the one that who came with the word of God. Another thing that another point that I want to make it clear is that as a society, the dichotomy that exists around traditional practices and Christianity is that I want to believe that we appreciate the tradition, particularly with the dancing that has been happening, that we appreciate the love, we appreciate the practice of love as a society. But as Christians, we should also understand that there is also one God who exists among all of us, and that is one who deserves the reverence.
Christianity is not a modern thing, because we heard we had a thing saying Christianity is about approximately 2,000 years ago. So Christianity is not a modern thing, because when we check the Bible, we check slaughtering is not a new thing. We have been slaughtering. There were altars in the Bible where Christians were sacrificing. So sacrificing and killing animals was a thing. But then when it comes to Christianity, we go back and look at Jesus. Jesus being the ultimate sacrifice. So after Jesus, no other sacrifice is allowed, because we are saying Jesus is our ultimate sacrifice. And when it comes to ancestors, we have been relating to ancestors, because in the Bible we hear God of Jacob, God of David, so we have been relating to our ancestors. So after we have been relating to ancestors. So in conclusion, we are saying after Jesus is the ultimate prize. So everything that we do as Christians, we take it comes back from the Old Testament, going to the New Testament, which is Jesus.
All right.
Thank you.
I'm gonna give you quick one, please, my brother. We need to take a break. Yes.
Thank you so much. My name is Ludongwenya. And what I really wanted to correct is to our clinical scientist. What I want to say is that Christianity cannot conform to traditional practices. Why am I saying that? Remember that it was according to the Jews' tradition and custom that they do not eat with the Gentiles or non-believers. But we see it when Apostle Paul comes over a few number of times saying that there is no Jew, there is no Gentile, there is no male, there is no female, there is no slave, there is no master, and we are all one in Christ. And I believe that also when Apostle Paul rebuked Peter to say that you should stop this act of hypocrisy, that when you see your Jews or your Jew brothers coming, you start to not want to eat with the Gentiles. So what am I saying? You cannot play for both teams. We are all one for Christ, and we should constantly continue to trust in our God, and we should constantly continue to believe in Him alone. We should have faith, and in Him alone we should have trust. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much. And of course, Mbugelo, do interact with us in Kundlan Zethu Zokuxhumana as we continue to have this also important conversation. Ohlelweni namhlanje siyabuya ke masibuya straight after this.
Eras are divided into 100 years. So we entered into an era of oppression. And that era of oppression came inborn. People were gifted with the kind of gift I have of spiritual guidance. They warned the nation that there's a certain people who are coming, and when these people are coming, accept this, do not accept that. They gave all the instruction from the spiritual dimension. But our ancestors did not listen, especially our kings in those days who were in charge. And then we entered in the era of oppression. Then we got our colonization. Then we got our apartheid. In South Africa, we were bonus with apartheid. And that was the era of oppression. So that 100 years now, or that era has come to an end. We are in a new 100 years era now. And what is happening, I call it the African spiritual revival. I prophesied about it in 2017. That's why if you can look yourself today, you can go on Facebook, social media, it's like there is this awakening of black people all over the world, even what they call black Americans. I travel a lot. There is this awakening, there is this question that they are asking themselves. In terms of spirituality or our beliefs, are these our beliefs, or where are our beliefs? It's the revival of African spirituality. Meaning that the spiritual dimension, are now giving us another opportunity to revive ourselves, to love ourselves as African people, to accept and embrace our being and our true spiritual gifts, not religions that were given to us. So this is also part of that. So others, it's true embracing of what was being hidden or being suppressed through other foreign religions. Others, it's Islam. Others, it's just a confusion. They don't know what is happening. So it's a mixture of things. And others, it's just fashion. You know, when something is popular, everybody wants to follow.
Welcome back. You're still watching your number one youth current affairs show. We are having a very heated conversation as we commemorate Heritage Month here on the show. And of course, the poll question that we're asking you is this: is this the new trend, or are young people truly embracing their African spirituality and tradition? And of course, we're speaking about Sangoma. Let me get that right. Sangoma. And obviously, just is in a modern space, is it still relevant? My panelists, there were so many questions that were coming from young people. Relevant, right? But I think, Pastor, can I ask you maybe to address the question, especially around how do you recognize a true calling, and especially in the church, we recognize people have giftings. Why are those giftings okay within the confines of Christianity, but if they exist outside of Christianity, they're not necessarily a good thing?
All right, Jack. First of all, in the book of Ephesians, chapter 4, verse 11, the Bible tells us something, that it is Christ who calls. He says, some he gave to be apostles, to be prophets, to be pastors, to be evangelists, to be teachers of the word. So according to us Christians, it is Christ who calls someone. I'm going to make an example to me. I first met Christ in a dream before any pastor could preach to me. You understand? But guess what? Another man who came to my home, who was a head of the Sangomas, said, I have a calling of the ancestors. While I was explaining to him that Christ said this and this and this to me. And during that time I was 15, you know, I saw him, he spoke whatever that I am today. It's what he said back then. You understand? So there is, I don't want to call it demonic what, but I can say that there is a particular force that comes and steals what is true from us. Believe you me when I say, I was never preached to. Christ came to me in my dream and spoke to me, which means he called me from birth. So it's him who calls, according to us.
How did he look like?
Sorry?
No, so you're saying Christ came to you in a dream, and this is before someone preached to you. So what was the image that came to you? How did he look like?
All right. Are you speaking about the skin color?
No, just how did he come to you? So, because I think what one of the young people was asking, how do you recognize true calling, right? So how did you know this was Christ?
All right.
Did he present himself as, I am Christ, or?
All right. Like that. First of all, in the spirit, life is spiritual. Life is spiritual. In the spirit, you just know. When he came, my spirit was, I am a spirit with a soul living in the body. So in the spirit, you recognize things without someone saying, this is what, this is what.
So there was discernment. No, so I wasn't asking that to try and put you in that, because
Yes.
I think we want to be clear, and I think that's what we want to get from the show today, that we are clear, we're concise, that when young people leave the space, they have a better understanding. Prof, I think for you, especially because, you were speaking about traditional medicine, but how do we incorporate traditional African medicine within this very modern space that we're in?
Okay, so maybe just to take a little step back, from an academic perspective, actually, there are different types of healers, right? So you get a herbalist, and then you get a seer, a diviner, and sometimes they don't even they will not touch herbs. They might use water, right? And then you get a medium, a spiritual medium, right? Now, having said that, with the herbalist, sometimes things will come to them through dreams. I've met people who say, I dreamt and I was led to a particular point. The next morning I wake up and I get the herb, right? And I don't know if you know this, but up to about 60%, in fact, 60 to 90% of people worldwide use herbs. And over COVID, it was more. And it's not just in Africa. Actually, you find that in the US, but it depends on the disease you have. So if you had COVID and there was nothing you could turn to, we started using Lengana, right? If you have cancer today and you've gone through everything that can be used on cancer, you are likely, whether you're in the US or you're in South Africa, you're likely to go and try to find something traditional. So I think that's kind of the starting point. Then the next level is to say that we train, for instance, people about herbs. It's just if you go outside there, I can tell you how many different herbs there are, which you can use for many different things, right? And maybe that's something that young people should be focusing on. So young people should be having conversations with, the old people, our gogo, to say, but when you were growing up, what did you use for this and that and the other? That in itself is a very important calling, because it allows us to retain knowledge that is dying with old people. But we're not having those conversations. We need to have those conversations. So tonight, go and talk to your grandmother. And your grandmother is not your materna or paterna. It's someone in the village. What did people use for diabetes? What did people use for cancer? And let us codify that so that we can then research that information.
And what's also very interesting is that it almost feels like knowledge that is inherently African, we don't recognize it and give it the value until something westernized comes. And then, like they speak about, is it moringa? These are like herbs and medicinal, solutions that have always been there. Kale, but I mean, let's just be honest, but it's very expensive. Yes, absolutely.
So I've just come back from the UK, and I had taken there a product from South Africa which is made from sorghum. And there's no sorghum drink in the UK, right? So for them it's like, wow, this is fantastic. Meantime here, it's like, we don't like this, it's for poor people, or it's, So I think one of the things we need to do is to just recognize that knowledge within our communities, because it's up to us, to then value that knowledge. We should not wait for other people to tell us the value of what we have.
And here institutionally at TUT, what are you doing to support young people who feel that African spirituality is something that they want to embrace? I mean, the Congress of Traditional Healers of South Africa have called for the 8th of May to be Ancestors Day. I mean, do you recognize that the same way that we recognize other, holidays that are obviously a little bit more westernized, Christian holidays, Muslim holidays? I mean, what are you doing to support students who want to embrace that part of themselves?
Okay, and again, because we are about products and pharmaceutical science, so we have programs where we train people. Like, I do a lot of research. At the moment, for instance, one of the interests is around cannabis, right? And we are saying, like, I have a group of students who are looking at indigenous ways of processing cannabis, because there are indigenous ways in which cannabis was processed so that it would be effective, sometimes actually so that it would not result in psychotic disease, right? And these are indigenous things, and these are things that we don't know. So I've said to these students, go out again and talk, have those intergenerational discussions. Let's not ignore old people, because old people are actually the repository of a lot of knowledge. And once you start, old people are good, because when you start talking to them about what their lives were like, they just open up. And they are very good at sharing this information. So those are the things that we need to do. When I work with traditional healers, one of the things I always say to them is, I don't want to know what you're packaging, but we can help you to package it into a pharmaceutical form, right? Because, you don't want to go into an office with a big, dirty bottle of medicine, but you can have capsules, for instance, yeah? And those are user-friendly, and therefore, that's one of the things that we need to do, to bring standards, at least not on the spiritual side, because, spiritual is not something that anybody can touch, but certainly on the practical side of, the treatment side, the African traditional medicine side.
Absolutely. Zalani, your parting shots? Especially when it comes to even our poll question, yeah.
Sure. No, thank you so much. I think, firstly, I want to almost express that I was listening to some of the young people and what they were expressing, almost this polarized view of it's either I'm this or I'm that, and I can't be both. And I almost want to encourage people to feel that they can be the truest version of themselves, and that it's okay to be. I think also the second thing that I'd like to almost emphasize in today's conversation is that perhaps what we think is a trend is exactly what we would typically call a spiritual liberation that young people hadn't seen prior to this. But also, we're living in a digital age where people are on TikTok, people are on Instagram, and people are documenting their journeys. And it doesn't mean that it's new, it just is in our face now because we're online and we're digital, and it doesn't make it fundamentally wrong. Yeah. I also want to just conclude and say, as we talk about these things, like Ugogo Dineo said, where you feel that you need psychological or social work help, do seek help and make sure that you're actually talking to someone that cares about your spiritual and psychosocial well-being. Thank you.
Thank you. Closing comments.
Sangoma don't operate outside communities, and it's important as communities to hold our healers accountable, because motu Sangoma uthi ngumlaphi wendabuko, ngumhlanganisi, ngumlungisi, ngumlulamisi. The minute we start to rape women, the minute we start to jesa banna babatu, we don't qualify for the title. And we as the community, we should stop calling people whom we know are malpracticing as healers, because they are in our community. So we should say, so we're not going to recognize you as such, because we are the ones who are giving them the service. We need to rip them off the titles that we have given them as communities.
Thank you, Zolani. Thank you, Prof. David, Pastor Zolani, Gogo Dineo. I mean, we could speak for 10 hours, but yeah, I definitely think you've given us a lot of food for thought and great insight. I think young people are going to have something that they can take with them that's very tangible and solid. So yes, unfortunately, we've run out of time. Don't worry, part 2, coming soon. Coming soon, part 2. TUT, you have been amazing. Thank you so much. Wow. Expressions belongs here. We belong here. Thank you so much.
All right. Okay, guys. No, once again, we appreciate you so much and thank you so much for joining us. Siyazi to you guys. Some of you all have transport to catch, but thank you so much for having this conversation because this is your platform and our duty is just to make sure we give you the platform to voice all your views. So thank you so much, TUT. Siyabonga siphaphethanga zozombini. And also, once a very big thank you to our panelists once again. Mbugeli, thank you so much now for your contribution. Till next time, see expressions and Salega. Here's a performance that we're leaving you with. Take care.
Adios, muchachos. Bye.